Hey everyone, and welcome. We're diving into something pretty interesting today, languages in the US.
Yeah,
And specifically,
always a fascinating topic.
it is specifically that kind of strange fact that the US doesn't actually have an official language
Right?
at the federal level,
Yeah,
which is wild when you think about it.
it is. It's funny. That wild is a perfect way to put it
Yeah.
because you'd be surprised how many people I talk to, just in casual conversation who are like,
Right.
wait, English isn't the official language.
Yeah.
Like it's just this assumption,
Yeah, you just kind of figure, right?
you do. And
Yeah.
it really makes you think about what
Yeah.
that says about us, I think.
Yeah.
About, what we just assume is true.
And I think it's easy to make that assumption, right? Because English is everywhere, obviously. But then you look at the actual numbers.
What do we got?
And it's like, okay, so 77.5% of U.S. residents, they speak only English at home.
Okay.
But that means that nearly a quarter of us are speaking something else.
Yeah. It's a big chunk of the population.
It is.
And it speaks to really just how diverse
Yeah.
the country is linguistically.
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, you look at the census data, it's amazing.
Yeah.
430 languages
We're 430.
spoken across the country.
Okay. See, that's mind-blowing to me.
It's wild, right? I mean, think about it. 430 different ways
Yeah.
that people are communicating, expressing themselves, telling stories. It's incredible.
That's a lot of stories. So obviously, English is the most spoken.
Sure, yeah.
But what are we talking about after that? What's like the breakdown, if we were to kind of like
Okay.
paint a picture of this linguistic landscape?
So if you're looking at the U.S., right, after English,
Yeah.
Spanish is a heavy hitter,
I would imagine.
13.7%,
Okay, yeah.
which is huge.
That's a significant portion.
Man, it's not just about the numbers,
Right.
It's the influence. Think about it. Spanish is everywhere. I mean, it's in our food, our music.
It really is.
It's in our slang. Like, it's part of the culture.
I mean, think about Spanglish. Like, that's a whole thing.
Exactly.
And that's not even like just a language. That's like a blend. It's like a...
It's a whole cultural phenomenon, right?
It is. It is.
It shows how cultures mix and influence each other
Right here.
right here in the U.S. And it really highlights how immigration plays into all of this.
Totally.
So you've got Spanish, but then, right alongside that, you have Chinese, you have Tagalog, Vietnamese.
Oh, wow.
And these are reflections of, like, more recent immigration, right?
Right.
So you can see how America is changing just based on who's here, who's speaking.
So it's almost like you can like track history through this.
You absolutely can. I mean, language leaves a footprint, right? You can see which languages grew when, which ones maybe faded a bit.
Yeah, and that actually makes me think of something because I've always heard that German used to be way more common
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating one.
in the US, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the story there?
So German is interesting because it shows that it's not always straightforward, this connection between ancestry and language.
How so?
Well, I mean, it's a major ancestry group in the U.S., German.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But the use of the language itself actually declined.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have thought with, so many people with German heritage.
You'd think it would be thriving, right?
Right, exactly.
It's a mix of things. Historically, World War I, that was a big turning point.
Oh, right, of course.
A lot of pressure against speaking German.
Wow.
So that definitely played a role in the decline. It's
Yeah.
actually, it's kind of a sad example of how
Yeah.
global events, they can have these ripple effects on culture that
Yeah.
you might not expect.
Yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking, honestly, to think that like a generation was kind of like pressured
Yeah.
to like suppress part of who they were,
Yeah.
because of what was going on in the world.
It makes you think, right, about the weight that language carries.
It does. It does. And that it's not just about like the words.
It's tied up with identity,
Yeah.
history, politics even.
It is. It is. And speaking of politics, I wanted to ask about something that I know
Sure.
I've heard people talk about a lot, which is those English-only policies,
right,
that some states have.
Yeah.
Like, what's the deal with that? What does it even mean to have an official language anyway?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And honestly, I think it's important to really unpack that because the reality
Okay.
is often a lot more, complex than
Oh.
people realize.
Yeah.
It's not always.
So give it to me straight then. What's like the nuance that we're missing here?
Okay, so let's take California, for example.
Okay.
Their state constitution, it actually has an English-only clause.
It does.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Sounds pretty straightforward on the surface, right?
Yeah, it does.
But here's the thing. California also offers driver's license exams in 32 different languages.
Wow. Okay.
So it highlights that these policies, they're often more about
Okay.
setting a standard for, how the government operates
Right.
than about actually like erasing other languages.
So it's less about excluding people and more about just having like a common ground.
Yeah, it's about clarity, efficiency in those really specific contexts.
Got it.
It's not necessarily about trying to like shut out other cultures or anything like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it really gets at that bigger question of like, what does it even mean for a language to be official?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it about recognizing, the dominant language? Is it about trying to promote some kind of unity? Or is it something else entirely? These are questions people have been debating for ages.
And I'm guessing there are no easy answers.
Not at all. But before we dive into that whole debate,
Okay.
I do want to address one myth I hear all the time
Okay. Yeah. Let's do it.
that I think plays into this whole official language thing. Have you heard that one about German almost becoming the official language of the U.S.?
Oh, the Muhlenberg legend. Yeah, heard it a million times.
Right. It's like it's everywhere.
And honestly, always sounded a little too good to be true.
Yeah, you got to wonder about those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things that gets passed around,
But it's like a good story.
Right, exactly. Like a fun fact,
Yeah.
but not quite the whole picture.
So what is the real story?
So no dramatic showdown in Congress to make German the official language or anything.
Oh, man.
It's actually a lot simpler than that.
Okay.
It boils down to a request to translate some legal documents for German-speaking immigrants. That's really it.
Oh, okay. See, that's less exciting.
Less exciting, maybe,
Yeah.
but also kind of refreshing, right?
It is, kind of. Like, get the real story out there.
Exactly. And, honestly, what is exciting is like
Yeah.
when you move past these myths,
Yeah.
the real linguistic diversity that's out there,
It's pretty wild.
it's amazing. And speaking of which,
Yeah.
you ready to unearth some like hidden linguistic gems?
Always down for a little linguistic treasure hunt. What are we digging into?
Okay, so let's start with indigenous languages.
Okay, yeah.
These are languages that have been spoken in North America for centuries, representing these vibrant, unique cultures.
Absolutely.
Take Navajo, for example,
Okay.
spoken by over 170,000 people, primarily in the Southwest.
Yeah, I've heard of Navajo, but I gotta be honest, like, my knowledge is pretty limited.
Sure.
What makes it so unique?
Well, for one, it's got this incredibly rich history.
Yeah.
And, it actually played a really important role in World War II.
Really?
Yeah, they used it as a code.
Oh, wow.
The U.S. military, they used Navajo speakers as code talkers
That's amazing.
to transmit messages.
Wow. I never knew that.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is like to this day, the Navajo Nation, they've been so proactive in revitalizing the language.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They've got immersion schools. They've
Right.
got language learning apps.
Yeah.
They're really passionate about keeping it alive.
That's amazing. Like, using technology to keep a language alive,
It's amazing.
that's really cool. And it's a good reminder, too, that, like, these languages were here
Oh, absolutely.
long before English showed up,
Thousands of years, yeah.
Yeah.
And, speaking of revitalization efforts,
Yeah.
Cherokee Nation's another great example.
Yeah.
They've actually managed to increase the number of Cherokee speakers, which is
Hmm.
really hard to do.
Really? How do you even go about doing that? That seems like a monumental task.
It's a combination of things. They've got really strong immersion programs, especially in schools.
Okay.
They're creating new words
That's interesting.
to keep the language relevant to modern life. I mean, they're even teaching it in universities now.
Wow.
So, opening it up to a whole new generation.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really inspiring stuff.
It is inspiring. It gives me hope for, the future of all these different languages. And
Yeah.
so, okay, we've got Navajo, Cherokee. What other linguistic treasures are we unearthing today?
Okay, how about languages that are unique to the U.S.,
Okay.
like born and raised right here?
Yeah, what do we got?
Creole languages.
Ooh, okay. Now you're talking my language. Well, one that I want to learn more about. Break that down for me.
Okay, so Creole languages, they often develop when you've got different linguistic groups coming together.
Okay.
And a new language kind of emerges from that interaction.
So it's like a blend, like a...
It's a blend. It's like a linguistic fusion.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So the prime example is Gula. Have you heard of Gula?
I've heard the name, yeah, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
So Gula is spoken in the coastal Southeast. And it's this fascinating blend of English and West African languages,
Oh, wow.
which reflects, the history of that region.
Of course, yeah.
And then you've got Louisiana Creole, which has its roots in French, African languages, even some indigenous influences in there.
It's like a whole tapestry of language.
Exactly.
Nice.
And it shows how adaptable language is, how it can change and evolve. And, while we're talking about different ways of communicating, we can't forget about sign language.
Oh, right, of course.
And I say sign languages because it's not just ASL.
Wait, there are other sign languages besides American Sign Language?
Oh, yeah.
I did not know that. Tell me more.
So historically, the U.S. was home to at least 6 distinct sign languages. Sadly, some of them have disappeared over time.
Oh.
You had languages like Plains Sign Talk, used by Native American tribes across the Great Plains, Martha's Vineyard Sign Language that one developed on an island off the coast of Massachusetts,
Wow, that's fascinating.
each with its own history, its own cultural significance.
It's incredible to think about, like, all these different ways humans have developed to communicate.
It's remarkable.
It makes you realize how much you just don't even think about,
Right. We take it for granted sometimes.
We really do. We really do. But okay, so we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, right? This whole debate about making English the official language.
Right.
So what are the arguments there, like for and against, and how does that play into everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, that's the big question.
It's kind of like at the core of what it means to be American,
That's a great way to put it.
Like this tension between
Yeah.
having all these different histories and cultures, but then also like
Right?
this desire to like have some kind of unity.
It's a balancing act, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think, folks who support making English the official language, a lot of times they'll argue that it's about, like, practicality.
Okay.
Like it streamlines things, government operations,
Right.
makes
This,
sense,
that.
official documents, all that.
Mhm.
Even just, like, everyday communication in a civic sense.
Right. Having that common ground.
Exactly.
So what about the other side? Like, what are the worries about making English official?
Well, I think the biggest concern you hear is that it's going to end up marginalizing people
Yeah.
who don't speak English natively.
Right. Of course.
Making them feel like they're not as American
Right.
or creating barriers, for them. And when we've just been talking about this
Right.
incredible
Yeah.
linguistic tapestry.
It feels wrong to then say, but,
Right, exactly.
only this one matters.
It sends the wrong message. So it's really about, like, how do you balance those things?
Right.
How do you embrace that diversity?
It's almost like, how do you celebrate all the different colors, but then still have like a thread that connects them all?
Yeah. And, I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Right.
The U.S. is a nation of immigrants, and that history is messy.
Yeah,
It's complicated.
for sure.
And our language reflects that.
Yeah.
So really this debate, it's about more than just language,
What is it about then?
It's about our values, how we see ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
how we include people, or maybe how we don't include people.
Man, that's like really deep.
It's deep stuff,
Mm.
but important stuff to grapple with, right?
It is. It is. Well, I think this has been
Yeah.
quite the journey.
It has been quite the deep dive, hasn't it?
We started with this like kind of fun fact that the U.S. doesn't have an official language.
Right.
We went through all these amazing languages spoken across the country, from Spanish to Chinese, Navajo, Cherokee.
Yeah. Don't forget about Gula.
Oh, right, Gula. All those Creole languages.
So much richness out there.
I mean, mind-blowing stuff, honestly.
And the crazy thing is,
Yeah.
we're just scratching the surface.
I know, right?
Like, there's so much more to explore with every single one of these languages.
That's the thing about language, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can spend your whole life
Oh, absolutely.
learning about it and just barely,
Yeah.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said. Well said.
So on that note, I'll leave you with this. Think about all the amazing languages we've talked about, and if you could pick one
Yeah.
that you don't know much about
Okay.
to kind of dive into yourself, which one would it be?
I love that.
And what does that tell you about, yourself and the connections you want to make?
What a great thought.
So until next time, keep those ears open, those minds engaged, and keep on diving deep.